is WVVA in Focus, a weekly program about important issues and events in the two Virginias.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I'm your host, Melinda Zosh. This morning we're going to discuss a new podcast called Health Interrupted. Joining us in just a moment to talk about this podcast and how you might benefit from it is Gina Lombardi. She's wife to Princeton native and actor Kevin Sizemore. She's also an actress and author and a big part of this podcast. She'll be joining us via Zoom from Los Angeles. Also joining us is Dreama Denver, author and wife of the late Bob Denver, who played in Gilligan's Island. But I'll start with Gina. What is this podcast all about, Gina?
Hi, Melinda. Hi, thanks so much for having us today. Health Interrupted is a podcast that came about over the pandemic with myself and a dear friend and client of mine, Laura Kepler, who's a former Miss America 2012. And what we realized is that life is so full of interruptions every day. In fact, in our own lives, we were getting interrupted during our workouts by her small children or somebody coming into the room or the doorbell ringing, or maybe one of us was sick that day or something like that. And we thought, what if we did an entire podcast about health interruptions, and not only what those interruptions are, but how that individual either survived it or got through it or is still dealing with it. And we give lots of tips and fun things at the end of every episode that you can focus on from that day forward to make the quality of your life better. And we had the benefit and the honor of having Dreama Denver on our podcast a couple weeks ago, which you can go and download on any podcast app, or you can go to healthinterruptedpodcast.com and listen to it there. But Dreama's story is so stunning. She's been through so much, and some of it you'll find out that you may not have known. And she just always comes through it with grace. So we were honored to have her, and it's a pleasure to have her here today with you, Melinda. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Gina. And let's bring Dreama in now. Dreama, why don't you tell us about your story then?
Oh, well, first of all, it's good to be here with you, and it's so good to see you, Gina. I love when I get to see you.
Me too.
We all go through health interruptions in our lives. Sometimes it's the people we love that, of course, affect us. And then sometimes it's us going through a health interruption. So I've been through quite a few of those. Part of the reason I wrote my book, Gilligan's Dreams, was to show people that you can survive, because obviously most people know, locally here anyway, that Bob and I had a son that was diagnosed. I still have a son diagnosed with severe autism. And that was a huge health interruption. It changed our lives completely when he was diagnosed. And then, of course, my husband passed away, and that was a huge health interruption. And when my husband was ill, we were in Winston-Salem. And because of the stress of being there and fighting alongside him, I had a heart attack. So that was a personal health interruption. And then 10 years after Bob died, 10 years to the day, as a matter of fact, I was sitting at Vanderbilt Breast Center beginning treatments for breast cancer. So I went through that one without him. And, all of those things change you. But the thing that I found is that we learn so much more when we're in the valleys, and not quite as much when we're on the mountaintop. So I think you have to look for the silver lining, look for the lesson, and try to move on from there. And it's doable, even when you think it isn't.
And Dreama, that's very important that you shared your story. I'd like to bring Gina back in for this next question. So Gina, I was just on your website a few minutes ago before this broadcast. Tell our viewers more about what kind of health stories are being shared on your podcast's website.
Yes, in fact, we really try to broaden our guest list, because we had said to each other, we don't just want this to be just celebrity stories. Even though that may pull more listeners or viewers, we really wanted to reach every corner of the earth. And because of the pandemic, and this is so cool, we've been able to do all of our interviews on Zoom. So we can literally talk to anyone, anywhere in the world, and we have. We talked to a gentleman in the UK who had Parkinson's disease. We talked to people in Australia, Europe, everywhere across the United States. So, for instance, we had a lovely woman on who was a USC film student. And just after she graduated, she was in her driveway, taking some things out of her apartment and putting it in her car. And a 16-year-old drunk driver, he only had his license for 2 weeks, crashed into her and drug her and pinned her between her car and his car and took off both of her legs. And this story is just so heartbreaking. But the silver lining, as Dreama put it, is that she went on to be a Paralympic world champion skier and won so many titles. And she had never skied a day in her life. So obviously she's using prosthetics. But her story is so amazing. We had another gentleman on who was a comedian who had a stroke while he was driving. You wouldn't believe some of the stories that we have found on different corners of the earth. So what we feel is that every story, you're going to be able to relate a little bit of that to your own life and take what they got out of it, their silver lining, and apply it to yourself.
And Gina, just a follow-up question to what you just said. How did the idea for this podcast come about in the first place?
Well, because Laura and I were always being interrupted in our workouts because she has 2 small children. She has a 1.5-year-old and a 6-year-old. So many times when we were working out over the pandemic on Zoom or FaceTime, you know, she'd be interrupted and I'd be waiting, or my son would come in and ask me a question, not realizing I was working. And we thought, you know, why not take it one step further and go into health interruptions? Because there's so much misinformation out there. I do want to point out that we also have a lot of experts on the podcast. We have doctors. For instance, tomorrow we're interviewing a breast cancer doctor, Dreama, who you're going to really enjoy listening to. And, you know, she created a technique called the Goldilocks mastectomy. I don't know if you've heard of it, but she doesn't really believe in doing implants, so she believes in using the person's own fat tissue to do reconstruction. So that's going to be fascinating because October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So we also try to coincide our guests with whatever is happening that month in the world in the field of health. So whether it's stroke awareness, Parkinson's awareness, breast cancer awareness, we try to line that up as well.
Thank you, Gina. And I'd like to bring Dreama in for this next question. Dreama, why do you feel like it was important for you to share your personal health journey and struggles with the viewers out there on the podcast?
Well, you know, I want to say, first of all, this podcast is inspirational. I think that's pretty evident from the stories that Gina just told us. It is, you know, there's something about knowing that you're not in a boat alone. I know that obviously my husband was known all over the world, very recognizable, famous. And people find, in the case of somebody with some fame, somebody they know that they grew up with, people find comfort in hearing that Bob Denver, Gilligan, that they watched on TV for 40 years, or now 57 years actually, that he went through something similar to what they're going through. There's some kind of comfort in that. And so I think when you listen to Health Interrupted, you know, you hear that as bad as you feel like your story is, as hard as whatever you're going through feels to you, there are always people going through challenges that are life-altering, and they find their way through it. So I think it's really, I felt it was important to share my story because, again, I've had so many health interruptions, and believe me when I tell you, I did not think I could survive my husband's death. I just didn't think I could. I didn't even want to. And yet I did. And not only did I survive, but I have thrived. I've created a life. And I wanted people to know that it is possible, even when you think it isn't.
All right, that's very inspirational, Dreama. Thank you for sharing your story. We do have to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. Good morning once again, everyone. Welcome back to this edition of In Focus. This morning, we're talking about the Health Interrupted podcast, and I want to share some information with our viewers on how they can listen to that podcast and also see some behind the scenes of those guests in action and see those interviews. I'd like to bring back in Gina Lombardi for this next question. So, Gina, share with our viewers how viewers can go ahead and then listen to the podcast and then watch the behind the scenes.
Yes, you can listen to it on any podcast app, including iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Audible, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. Or the easiest way is to just go to healthinterruptedpodcast.com, which is our website, and click the listen button at the top, and all the current episodes will come up. And you can find Dreama's in there because hers is going to be really close to the top.
And Gina, I understand that there's also a Facebook page where people can see the behind the scenes interviews.
Yes, so if you actually, Facebook is Health Interrupted Podcast, and on Instagram at Health Interrupted Podcast, you can see clips, video clips from all of our interviews, and it's hilarious. We usually pick some of the most touching ones, but we also pick some funny moments in every episode, and that's always great.
And Gina, what's the long-term goal for this podcast? It almost seems like this could be made into a show at some point, right?
You read my mind, Melinda. I hope Netflix is listening right now because we would love to make this into a show. So, we want to hit our 50 episode mark. We're about at 34 right now. And we would love to make it into a show where people can actually see our guests and really learn in depth what they went through and how they came back out of it. And hopefully that'll touch many, many lives.
And Gina, what has the feedback been from the listeners so far on the podcast?
Well, I have to say we've had all 5 stars and lots of 5-star reviews on all the podcast apps. So yay us. I think it's going really well. We have amazing sponsors. So we have people that really believe in what we're doing. So that's incredible as well.
Great. I'd like to bring in Dreama for this next question. Dreama, why do you feel like a podcast like this is so important, especially in the age of social media? Gina mentioned that they're able to reach so many people all around the world as guests and also as listeners. Why do you think that this podcast is so important right now?
This is something positive. You know what I mean? There's so much on the internet. We have so much garbage in social media that that the cream is going to rise to the top, and that's what's going to happen with Health Interrupted. It's something that's going to help you in your life. It's something that's going to inspire you. Gina and Laura are awesome hosts. They make you feel so comfortable and so willing to tell your story, whatever your story might be. And honestly, people, when I open up almost any social media app, I struggle to find something uplifting and wonderful to either listen to or watch. And that's what Health Interrupted is. And I was happy and honored to do it, honored to share my story. I'm sure everybody else they've interviewed feels exactly the same way, because you know that you're putting something out there that's going to be beneficial to the viewers or the listeners. And that means something nowadays, because there's a lot out there that really isn't beneficial. So let's have something positive and good.
That's a good point, Dreama. And Gina, can you kind of add to what Dreama was just saying about having this as something positive, uplifting, even inspiring, and why that's important in today's age?
Yes. In fact, Laura and I, when we're prepping for each guest, we do all of our research. And we know that there's going to be that sad and sometimes negative part of the story, but that's not what we focus on. We really focus on how that individual came up and out of it, and whether it was with the support of their friends and family, or if it was something they did on their own, which has been the case in some stories that we've covered. That people had to go through things alone sometimes, and what was the common thread that got them through that. And what we found is one of them is you have 2 choices. You can curl up and die and just give up, or you can rise up and get through it. And all of our guests obviously rose up and got through it, or else they wouldn't be talking to us. But the other common thread was their faith. And I think in Dreama's case, that was a really big part of her recovery through all of her health interruptions, including the passing of her husband, was her faith. And I'm sure she's going to talk about that, because that was a really, really important and incredible part of her recovery.
And Dreama, why don't you go ahead and touch on your faith and how that did help you?
You know, it was huge. And for 20 years, actually, our son was 20 when his father passed away. I was on a path that I didn't realize I was on. And it was a path back to my faith and strengthening my faith. And I didn't even realize it. But it was interesting when I had the morning show, Sunny Side Up, on Little Buddy Radio here in town. We were doing a thing with the listeners, telling them, you know, practice gratitude, be grateful for all the things. So I was doing that. Every day I would go out and take a walk after the show with my dog, and I would thank the universe for, you know, all the good things in my life, the mountain air, the sunshine, all those things. And then one day, with no forethought, I had no idea this was coming, don't even know where it came from. But I was out doing that, thanking the universe, and suddenly I was on my knees.
Wow. So tell us more about that, though. Elaborate on what you
I was
just
on
said.
my knees thanking God, not the universe, for the hard parts, for all the tough things I'd been through. Because in that moment, for some reason, I understood that, again, like I said earlier, you learn more in the valleys when you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and keep on going. You learn more during those times than you ever do when it's smooth sailing and everything is just hunky dory, you know? So that was really clear to me in that moment. It changed everything. I got up off my knees and I knew something was different. I didn't know exactly what, but something was different. And from that moment on, my faith has just gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. And I know that it doesn't mean life is perfect. It doesn't mean I still don't face challenges. I don't get overwhelmed. We still do. But faith kind of allows you to have an anchor and to know that, you know, even when you feel alone, you're not alone.
Thank you for sharing that, Dreama. And as she mentioned, it's also, everything is a learning process in life. And Gina, I want to ask you this next question. What have you and perhaps even Laura learned by doing this podcast? How have you grown as individuals, and what have you learned since you've started the podcast?
Well, I think the coolest thing that we've learned is that we do a lot of things right in our lives, which has helped us, you know, with our own struggles. But we really have related to every single one of our guests in some way. And also, we have learned so much from them. Every episode, Laura and I, we get off our Zoom call and we both say, that was incredible. Like, I just learned something today that I can use in my own life. And we've been, you know, we're into like 34 episodes now, so we've done quite a few. And you would think we heard it all. We haven't. We still learn something new with every single guest. And it's just, we feel so honored. We feel so lucky that we get to meet all these amazing people and hear their stories and get their uplifting, incredible advice from the things that they've been through. So it's really been fun.
Right, and you're reaching people from all across the world, so that's really cool too. All right, ladies, we have to take one more quick break. We'll be right back after this. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to this edition of In Focus. This morning, we're talking about a fantastic topic, something that could help you and inspire you in your life, or maybe a loved one who has health struggles. But we're talking about a podcast, and it's Health Interrupted Podcast, and you can actually go to healthinterruptedpodcast.com to listen to the episodes. I'd like to bring back in Gina Lombardi. So Gina, I know podcasts and things like that, people really get into them and they look forward to them. How often are these podcasts coming out for the new episodes?
We drop one podcast a week because it gives people time to listen to it and to really dig into it. So we drop our podcast every Wednesday morning early. So when you get up in the morning, you can go right into it and listen to a new episode. once a week we found has been really great because we don't overdo it, and we really feel as though each guest is precious and their story is important. So we feel like once a week is a good amount.
How long are the episodes?
The episodes are anywhere from 35 minutes to an hour, depending on the guest. And again, we feel like that's enough time now that people are back in their cars. That's usually where people listen to podcasts. So that's a good amount of time. Maybe you listen to half of it on the way to work and the other half on the way back. Or if you have a long commute, you can listen to the whole thing, and it passes the time and you're going to learn something. So that's our goal.
And Gina, I know you said you've done like a lot of research on the various topics and the people that will be a part of your podcast, but how do you and Laura and the others who are part of the podcast go about finding your guests?
You know, that's a good question, and a lot of people ask us that. In fact, a lot of other podcasters have asked us that because many of them do have a hard time finding guests. We have not had a hard time at all finding guests because what human on this earth has not had health interruption? Whether it's big or small, we've all had them. I mean, I could think of 10 right off the bat that I've had myself. And my husband being an actor, and y'all know Kevin, he's had a lot of things, you know, when he was filming. And as a matter of fact, we need to have him as a guest on Dreama. Why haven't I thought of that until now?
I don't know. It's too obvious, I think.
Right. But people, if you would like to be a guest on our podcast, we want to hear from you. So if you go to the healthinterruptedpodcast.com website and go to the contact page, there's a little form that you fill out with your name, email address, and what your health interruption is. And that will come right to me and Laura so we can see it. If you have a health interruption that you want people to hear about, please contact us. We would love to talk to you.
That's good to know. Thank you, Gina. And I'd like to bring back in Dreama for this next question. And Dreama, sharing health struggles, it can be something that people maybe don't do naturally. It's something that can be very personal and private. But how do you think that coming out and sharing what people have been through, how could that help them grow as a person?
Wow. You know, I was just sitting here thinking about the story Gina told earlier about the young woman hit by the 16-year-old drunk driver, losing her legs. The resilience of people, the way that people rise up is amazing to me because my story doesn't sound anything like that. To me, mine is so much more just easier than trying to get through something like that. So I think when you share your story, I think it's good for the person sharing because, again, hopefully you're putting something out there that will benefit someone who might be going through something similar when they hear it. I just think we have to share these things. We have to understand each other and to support each other through any and everything, especially nowadays, I think. So when you hear somebody's story, like the one Gina told earlier about one of her recent podcasts, you can't help but feel, even I do, and I've had some health interruptions, I feel like, wow, God bless her. And how did she do that? Because I would never be able to do something like that. And yet we all in our own way do rise up. And I think it's important for all of us to recognize that in each other and share those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for sharing your story on the podcast too, Dreama. I think that's very important that you were able to open up and share that. Ladies, we have just a few minutes left. I want to get concluding thoughts from each of you. Gina, I'll start with you. What do you hope our viewers take away from this segment about Health Interrupted podcast?
I really hope that you'll go and listen to some of the episodes. You can pick and choose which ones speak to you. Although, of course, we hope you listen to all of them because we know that you're going to get so much out of each one. And at the end of every episode, we give tips in 4 categories. We give a fitness tip, a nutrition tip, a beauty tip, even for guys, and we give a mental spiritual tip. And all of those things I think you'll benefit from because you'll be able to try them and use them in your own life. And then ultimately we give a call to action at the end of every episode. And by the way, all these tips are given to us by our guest, not from Laura and I. So it's really going to be useful. You're going to find you'll get a lot of good out of it.
Great. Thank you so much, Gina. And Dreama, we have, again, just a little bit of time left, about a minute or so. Any concluding thoughts for our viewers who are listening?
Yeah, just go listen to the podcast. And I love my tip. Was it a beauty tip? When you asked about like what products do you use? My tip, I'm going to give it to you guys now, especially ladies of a certain age. Smile, because it's an instant facelift.
That's wonderful. And both you ladies have beautiful smiles too. And one time I heard a saying that said the prettiest thing a girl can wear is her smile. And I think that's true, and you never know how that might inspire someone. But again, I want to thank our guest this morning, Gina Lombardi, Dreama Denver, for coming in and just sharing valuable information with our viewers. And we want to remind you that you can go ahead right now, after this segment ends, go ahead and listen to that podcast. It's healthinterruptedpodcast.com, so you can go there and listen to more than 30 episodes right now and tune in every week for a new episode. But that does it for this edition of In Focus. We'll see you all again next Sunday right here on WVVA. Until then, we hope you have a fantastic day and an even better week. Have a good one.